Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Neeru Tandon, Department of English, VSSD College, Kanpur. We are discussing Paper 13, Linguistics. In this paper, the module number 2 has been written by me. The title is Nature of Human Language. In the terms of linguistics, which is a scientific study of language, we know what the language is. Whenever we talk about language, the term that comes in our mind is human language. We never think of language of animals, language being used by some other. Only the human language comes in our mind, because language is omnipresent. Language is everywhere. It is in our thoughts, it is in our prayers, it is in the way we think, whatever we imagine, in our pleasure, in our pain. Everywhere we cannot imagine our life without language. And language is human language. It's not one language, it's not two languages, it's not group of languages, but human. So what is this human language, and how a human being acquires this language? How the development takes place in the language, because language changes. Language is not always the same. So how it changes? How a human baby acquires this particular language? We discuss this in this particular module. I will like to quote in this regard. The philosopher Bertrand Russell once wrote, "A dog cannot relate his autobiography. However eloquently he may bark, he cannot tell you that his parents were honest though poor." Unquote. What he wanted to say, that expression through language is the property of humans. Only human language has got this characteristic that can be studied in linguistics. So whenever we say language, we mean human language. Language is a very important means of communication. We all know that. It is the communication between humans. We share a common code that makes up the language. No doubt. There are many other means of communication used by humans. For example, gestures, nods, winks, flags, smiles, horns, shorthand, braille, alphabet, mathematical symbols, Morse code, sirens, sketches, maps, acting, miming, dancing, and whatnot. But human language is a social phenomena. When we say that human language, we just explain it in terms of the particular society in which that human being lives. Because whenever we use language, we used to communicate. That is the basic use of language. So whom to communicate? Communicating with animals, we don't need language for that much. We need language to communicate with other human beings. We are not born with one particular language. Suppose we can say that I am born with Hindi language, you are born with Tamil, or somebody with Russian, or somebody with French. No, it's not. We are born only with the capacity to acquire a language. And which language we acquire, it depends upon the social arena. It depends upon the social setup in which we are acquiring that particular language. Why do we acquire that language? Actually, we acquire that language because we want to understand the society. We want to understand the people. We want to communicate with them. We want us to be understood by others. So we use this medium to communicate, and this medium, this powerful medium, is language. And the study of this powerful medium of communication is called linguistics when it is done scientifically. It can fully be described only if we know all about the people who are involved in it, their personalities, their beliefs, attitudes, knowledge of the world, relationship to each other, their social status, etc. Language appears to be unique in the natural world, a defining feature of the human condition, although other species have complex communication system of their own. Even our closest living primate relatives do not speak, in part because they lack sufficient voluntary control of their vocalizations. You can just imagine that after years and years of training, the chimpanzees, the monkeys and the other animal that we think can imitate human being, they are not able to speak. Not even that much that a toddler can speak. Because why? This is something we want to study. We want to study it scientifically. What are the reasons behind it? That a human toddler can just grab the language so soon. Within a year or two, he starts just connecting words and starts speaking a particular language. We cannot stop anyone from speaking. If we want that a child, we are not going to teach him any language, fine, don't teach him. If we want that he should not just grab any language for that matter, is it possible? No, it's not. Whatever language he will come across, he will just grab it, he will just acquire it, and he will just try to communicate in that particular language. It is not so with other animals. We see that skills of these exceptional cases have not come close to those of a typical human toddler who will spontaneously use the generative power of language to express thoughts and ideas about present, past, and future. Linguistics studies human language, seeking to define its nature, to establish its relationship to human thought, and to discover what distinguishes human language from other forms of communication. That when we say other forms of communication, we mean human and non-human. It's not that only human beings communicate. The communication is there in the non-verbal sense in other animals as well. They also communicate, and somehow you may call it verbal also, because some sound system is there but no language is there. So that is the particular difference between human and non-human communication. When language is treated as a human behavior, a linguist is set to study and describe how physical movements and acts are involved into it, how people acquire and learn languages, how human cognitive system works behind the comprehension and production of speech sounds. Now let us define human language. We all understand it, but when it comes to defining, how various linguists have defined it. So in this case, we can take the name of Edward Sapir. That is a big name, who defined human language, who did a lot of work in the field of human language. In his own words, I quote, "Language is a purely human and non-instinctive method of communicating ideas, emotions and desires by means of a system of voluntarily produced symbols." So these are two terms in this definition that call for discussion. One is human and one is non-instinctive. So whenever we are talking about language, we are talking about humans. And it's not instinct. It's because this particular language is non-instinctive. Language, as Sapir rightly said, is human. Only humans possess language, and all normal humans uniformly possess it. Animals do have a communication system, but it is not a developed system. That is why language is said to be species specific and species uniform. Also, language does not pass from a parent to a child. In this sense, it is non-instinctive. A child has to learn language, and he or she learns the language of the society he or she is placed in. Let us talk more about this particular thing, that language a child never receives from his or her parents. What do we mean by that? Receiving in the sense that it's not just passed to him through genes or naturally. Actually, the child is supposed to acquire that language, maybe from his parents, maybe other persons around him. So language is acquired. It is not passed on. So a language is a set finite or infinite of sentences, each finite in length and constructed out of a finite set of elements. It has been said by Noam Chomsky. You can see his photograph on your screen. So Noam Chomsky is a big name in the field of language and linguistics. Chomsky meant to convey that each sentence has a structure. Human brain is competent enough to construct different sentences from out of the limited set of sounds, symbols belonging to a particular language. Human brain is so productive that a child can at any time produce a sentence that has never been said or heard earlier. Various other definitions should be discussed to understand it in a practical way. What other linguists have told about human language? I quote first from Encyclopedia Britannica. It is written, language is a system of conventional spoken or written symbols by means of which human beings as members of a social group and participants in its culture communicate. Unquote. In the same way, Lyons had said, languages are the principal systems of communication used by particular groups of human beings within the particular society. That what he means by that particular society, that he was talking about linguistic community. If I will acquire Hindi and you will acquire French, that depends on that linguistic community in which we are dwelling in. So this is what told by Lyons, and he also said that if you are member of any community and the language of the community will be automatically acquired by you being a human being. I will again quote the definition given by Wardock and Bloch and Traeger. Wardock said, a language is a system of arbitrary vocal symbols used for human communication. Mind it, arbitrary vocal symbols. In the same way, Traeger said, a language is a system of arbitrary vocal symbols by means of which a social group cooperates. Now, what is the difference? Both of them agree that it is arbitrary, it is vocal, and it is system. But he says it is in different words, they express the same thing and admit that it is a major means of communication, and it is essential if you want to understand human beings, if you want to understand the languages, it is just incumbent upon you to do its scientific study. Almost of the above mentioned definitions prominently point out that language is a system. Sounds joined to form words according to a system. Although initially the formation of words, as said earlier, is only arbitrary, convention makes them parts of a system. Words too join to form sentences according to some system. If I say a sentence that I enjoy teaching English language, and those words are said enjoy language teaching I. Is it a proper sentence? Am I communicating in a proper way? No, I'm not. Because every language has a system. And this is known as system of systems. That we are just doing it in a proper prescribed way. That way has been prescribed by someone and is applicable on me and applicable on you. The way I am saying it is being received by you in the same way. So, language is undoubtedly a kind of means of communication among human beings, and it consists primarily of vocal sounds. It is articulatory, systematic, symbolic, and arbitrary. Now, a major question comes: evolution of human language. When? How? In what circumstances? Human children have a unique and highly mysterious ability to acquire proficient speech and language skills without the need to be formally taught. After only a few years, a typical infant may grasp a huge vocabulary of words. He can use grammatical rules to combine them into a potentially limitless number of meaningful utterances. He can communicate with others the way he heard the communication being done by many others around him, and that he just acquires naturally. Sometimes he learns by imitating. But after that, he also starts inventing, he also starts adding, and within no time he has a number of words. His vocabulary is strong enough to convey what he wants to convey in his own sense. So it has long been suspected that the answers to this puzzle may lie somewhere in our genetic makeup. Importantly, the human genome does not contain the information about the set of words or rules for any specific languages themselves. We all need exposure to a language in order to learn it. So language is clearly an example of a complex dynamical system. It exhibits highly intricate network structures of all levels like phonetic, lexical, syntactic, and semantic, and this structure is to some extent shaped and reshaped by millions of language users over long period of time as they adapt and change them to their needs as part of ongoing local interactions. Initial attempts to teach non-humans the human language failed. And when it was surveyed and the research was done scientifically, the conclusion came that there is some deficiency in their vocal apparatus. Now that makes it clear that biologically human beings are perfect for gaining a language, any language, and not any particular language. Which language they will acquire? It will be dependent upon many other outside factors. When these initial attempts of teaching language to non-humans failed, another thing came and research was shifted in 1960 to some manual way of communication. Yes, that is known as American Sign Language. These contemplations make it acceptable that human language arises in biologically based ways that are quite comparable to those directing other aspects of the structure of the organism. I quote Noam Chomsky. He said, "Human cognitive systems, when seriously investigated, prove to be no less marvelous and intricate than the physical structures that develop in the life of the organism. Why then should we not study the acquisition of a cognitive structure such as language more or less as we study some complex bodily organ." Unquote. The linguistic capacity that develops naturally in every normal human being appears to be best understood in functional rather than literal anatomical terms. Human language progress as growth. All mentally healthy children learn to speak the language that they are exposed to within the first few years of life. We are all familiar with how difficult it is to learn a foreign language as an adult or even as a teenager, yet children acquire those same languages flawlessly with no conscious effort. We do not work to learn our first languages, it just happens. Despite how very complex languages are, this suggests that we are programmed for the task. It is generally assumed that a grown-up's knowledge of his or her language results from simple learning or imitation. But we cannot ignore that we know much more than what we learn. Today, if we are told to count how many words we know in our own language, it is so difficult. We cannot even count, we cannot even know, we cannot even produce the whole list of the words known by us. It is there in our mind. It is there and it varies from person to person. Now, human languages, they are derived from shared biology. The notion that the world's languages are the product of a common human faculty rather than mere culturally determined accidents is supported by the researchers of the past. We must conclude that the profound structural similarities between signed and spoken languages, including not only the basic principles of their organization, but the specific path of their development. The brain regions associated with their control and many others are neither the result of simple shared history nor necessary consequences of the articulatory, acoustic, auditory modality of spoken language, but rather derived from shared biology. Now let us also talk about in this relation language gene. There is a particular language gene in human beings responsible for acquisition of a particular language. Is it a truth or is it a myth? There is a strong biological evidence that human linguistic capacities rely on modifications of genetic pathways that have a much deeper evolution history. But there is actually no such thing as a language gene or gene for languages. Genes do not specify cognitive or behavioral outputs. They contain the information for building proteins which carry out functions inside cells of the body. Some of these proteins have significant effects on the properties of brain cells, for example, by influencing how they divide, grow, and make connections with other brain cells that in turn are responsible for how the brain operates, including producing and understanding language. So, it is feasible that evolutionary changes in certain genes had impacts on the wiring of human brain circuits and thereby played roles in the emergence of spoken language. We must have heard the name of FOXP2. What is this FOXP2? It is a gene that has often been misrepresented in the media as the mythical language gene. It is true that FOXP2 is relevant for language. Its role in human language was originally discovered because rare mutations that disrupt it cause a severe speech and language disorder. But, for example, songbirds have their own version of FOXP2 which helps them learn to sing, but it is not unique to humans. So, it is there but in a different way. So, human language faculty as an organ and its acquisition is primarily a matter of cultural transmission rather than biologically driven maturation in the presence of relevant experience. It is also controverted by instances of the development of structurally deficient dialects into the essentially normal linguistic systems found in creoles. There are certain features of language: systematic, duality, is structurally complex, and we cannot just ignore that language has both linguistic and communicative competence. So productivity as the most important property of human language has been established by Chomsky, and when he said that he pointed out that we could understand and produce indefinitely many utterances that nobody has either produced or heard previously. It means generally we produce brand new sentences except when we use conventional expressions such as good morning, how are you, yes I am fine, and so on. So the number of phonemes, morphemes and words in a language are limited. But with these limited symbols, we can create countless sentences. We can use them in the way we want. We can just design various sentences, various meanings, various expressions as per the quality. So this cannot be done in any other communication system. That's why human communication and human language is unique in its own way. To summarize, we can just reach at this conclusion that human language acquisition is a process unique in itself. Non-verbal communication may be found in other species also, but their bodily, biological terms are not that much defined, so they are not fit to acquire any particular human language in this sense. Thank you for visiting EPG Pathshala.